Session on health and welfare. My name is Erland Hjelmqvist. I'm the Secretary General of the Swedish Research Council for Health, Working Life and Welfare. We have a very tight program with many interesting presentations, and we will do our best now to keep time and fulfill that expectation of finishing in time. But before that, there will be a lot of substance. And the plan for this session is like this. There will be 4 presentations by 4 different researchers, directors. And after that, I will give a summary of the work of NORIANET on registers. And after that, there will be a panel discussion with 5 people at the table. And after that, as the grand finale, there will be a discussion opportunity for revising the statements, conclusions, so to speak, which have been distributed on paper to all of you. So that's the plan for this event. So now I'm happy to welcome Viggo Nordvik, Research Deputy Leader of ReAssess, a Nordic Center of Excellence. And we will, to each speaker, indicate when 5 minutes are left and when 3 minutes are left. But before that, the microphone will start functioning, which is just that. So Viggo, please, you are very welcome.
Thanks a lot. As Erland said, I'm Viggo Nordvik, and my background is that I come from ReAssess. ReAssess is, or maybe we should say, was a Nordic Center of Excellence in welfare research, funded by Nordforsk. We are, for the time being, in a kind of terminal phase as a center. And part of this terminal phase, we are exploring the possibilities for a life after death. I can inform you that we have found out that there are possibilities for a life after death. But it seems like that the form of life after death is a bit different than the form of life before death. And apart from this, I think that I will be one of the few presentators who will not say much about health in this session. In our center, we had a quite strong comparative approach. And comparative welfare research, as all other comparative research, I would say, is about contrasting cases. It is about searching for similar structures, dissimilar structures, similar outcomes and dissimilar outcomes, and obviously linking these differences in outcomes to differences in structures. And I would say that one of the most, or the single most important input in this kind of comparative research is tedious, thorough, nitty-gritty country studies within country understanding of what is going on. So, just to translate my Norwegian directly into English, pour some cold water into the blood. I don't know whether that works in English, but I guess most Nordic people understand it anyhow. But I would say registers poses an immensely important input to analysis and also to cross-country analysis. But there has been a lot of discussion about merging registers across countries. For some purposes, as Mats illustrated before, for some purposes this is very important. But I would say for most purposes in social science research, it is national registers. It is comparison of analysis done separately on national registers that is most important. So what is most important for our field of study is the possibility to undertake good register-based studies at the national level and bringing the analysis of them together. There are, of course, there are some cases where that do not suffice. And I could mention only one example of a kind of study that we were not able to do in a proper way, even though the circumstances gave us I was almost about to say terrific a terrific natural experiment. But I think we should say a terrible natural experiment. Over the life course of our center, we had the Icelandic crisis. We were studying Nordic welfare states. This was an experiment we could have utilized, for example, by looking into workers in Iceland, how they migrated to other countries, and who migrated, what consequences did that have for the Icelandic society and economy, and who returned subsequently. In order to do that analysis properly, we would have had to have merged register data. There are a lot of ad hoc hypotheses of the mechanisms around this. And a lot of those ad hoc hypotheses are correct, and some of them are not correct at all. The similarities to what Mats talked about in these epidemiological studies is striking. And also, what one could do in the present situation, where we have a kind of, or a financial crisis going across Europe, but a financial crisis that has hit Europe differently, different parts of Europe differently, and thus induced a lot of labor migration. Is it lasting, or is it temporal? That we do not know. But I said that I think it is very important to facilitate proper register studies based on national registers. We have a long way to go before we have the systems so good in place that the only thing that remains is to link these registers. And from a Norwegian perspective, I'd say that some key question is, what is a project? What is the duration of a project? How should we handle the competence in handling large-scale register data? It sounds like a funny question. What has it to do with what is a project? I take a 5 minutes, that's perfect. I start out with a hypothetical example. I have for some time worked with neighborhood dynamic, neighborhood effects. There is a not so very nice word which you could call social contamination, the presence of social contamination. And let us hypothetically say that a Swedish researcher have been calling me up on the phone 2 days after the Huseby crisis or Huseby incident or riots here around Stockholm, and told me, listen, there is quite dramatic what has happened. It is dramatic that we have had these riots. It is dramatic that we think that there is a large part of the youth population that feel the need to riot or feel that the cost of rioting is so low for themselves because they have already lost everything. And we have a suspicion that this has something to do with the composition of the population in the area, that it has something to do with the tenure mix in the area, and with how the local schools are organized. And then we came to think about Norway, because Norway have quite similar composition of the population, at least at a higher aggregate level, quite similar organization of local schools, and a completely different mixture of tenures, owner occupation and rental housing. Maybe that has something to do with it. And what we want to do is to have a contrasting study in Norway. Can you help us out with this urgent, pressing measure? What I would have answered to this phone call is pretty obvious. Yes, definitely. This is societally pressing and very important, and it is also quite interesting as a researcher. So this I would do. I just have to look for funding, because if I don't have any funding, I will not get access to the data. And after I've got the funding, I will have to apply for permissions to use the data, which I know and which happens to be on my computer, but which I don't am allowed to use for this purpose. So after that, I will come back to you when I got all the funding and the permissions, and that should not take very much time. I'll call you in 2.5 to 3 years' time. Oh, I was very envious when Mats talked about those 4 days. That sounded terrific. So that is about what is a project. What one should get a bit closer to thinking about a project as a lasting kind of activity on a specific field. And one should have trust in researchers, so that researchers are working on a field and can react on this kind of hypothetical questions. Because I would say it is immensely fascinating for a researcher to work with these kind of questions and these kind of data. And it is also, to again lean on Mats, that it is an ethical obligation to utilize the opportunities in order to answer to these societally pressing questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Viggo. And there is time for one question. I didn't want to scare you, but it's still one question. Okay. Right. Well, thank you very much then. So there will be a possibility to come back to this issue of what is a project. That is a very topical issue, actually, relating to a lot of issues. So now I welcome Jan-Erik Litten to the floor. Jan-Erik Litten just landed. We are very happy for that.
I'm still awake, yes.
Yes, from Canada. Jan-Erik is, among other things, Director General of the BBMRI. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So Mats has always highlighted this that we call the BBMRI Nordic, and I will talk a little bit about that. That things we're doing actually here has also an impact outside the Nordic countries. I will give an example very soon. But the main reason we started this up is because we have been working together for decades when it's come to link registries. We have been drivers of big European projects. One of those examples are, of course, when we did the TwinNet, where we had all the twin registries in Europe, and we actually built a pre-cloud for how this could be done. And my task here was actually to connect 600,000 twin pairs between 7 European countries and Australia, and we did that. But the problem with all those projects is that when they really ends, and it's extremely difficult to get them alive. And we've done this over and over again. So the Nordic initiative in Biobank was sort of a first step actually to get things alive for many years. So we were very happy because Nordfors helped us with some money so we can start those kind of meetings that we started with, just to give information about things. We always start those meetings with a dinner before, so we have time to chat about things that happens in a Nordic country, and then we have a program. And this program has also evolved till a wish list that is much more than the points we have here. It's more than 10 points, and I will concentrate this little talk about the Nordic Biobank catalog. But we also have started to implement the colon cancer project between all Nordic countries. When it comes to the registries, that's nothing new, but it's new actually is to find samples, tissue, and those kind of things. And recently also we got a big grant for a Center of Excellence on Translation Register-based biobank research. So we even formed sort of an informatic group, say, between those countries, and the aim from the beginning was only to build a Nordic catalog. But then we decided to have what we thought was a final meeting in Tartu in August 2012. But just before the meeting, EBI called from England, and Cancer Biobank from the UK called, and also people from Netherlands. So we started all over again. How could we do this bigger and than we did for the Nordic catalog? So we started all over again, and then we decided to have a meeting down at MATS in Copenhagen. It was in April, I think. But just before that meeting, people from France called, Germany called, etc., etc. So it started to be sort of a European level, even if they were meant to be a Nordic catalog. And last week in Hague, we finalized how this catalog could look like for Europe when it comes to biobanks. We call it MyABIS. It's important to remember that this is not at all the registries that must describe. This is sort of a very simple thing where we have a descriptive data of biobanks. It's yellow pages, basically, how we can find biobanks in Europe. So we have now decided to on a European level, as a Nordic initiative, publish a new version of the MyABIS very soon that will be 3.0. And a lot of people also outside the Nordic country that are using this, and also outside European countries. I'm not going to go through them all, but I have met Chris Wilde twice now at EARC, who will have help with finding their samples. So they're also going to use the MyABIS. RD-Connect is a big European project for rare diseases that also is a collaboration between NIH and Australia, where we also will have this MyABIS as a set for funding biobanks for rare diseases. So there has sort of been a de facto standard for the things we are doing. And now the next step will be done because we have something called the BIMRA-ERIC. As you might know, it's a legal entity, and this was actually launched last week. And there is a lot of countries involved. Here we are missing Italy that also joined last week. So this is going to be the biggest infrastructure biobank or medicine ever launched on the European level. And what we have done in the Nordic country is also to set the stage for how to find those biobank with the initiatives. This is just one example of we start small in the Nordic country and has an impact on the European level. So I'm going to be responsible for the work program for the years to come, and this will be a part of what we are doing. So that's all from me.
Thank you very much. So now there are time for questions. Please. Now you are all invited. Yeah. Can you hear all?
I can speak loud.
Yeah.
I was just curious why Denmark is not participating
BBMRI.
Does this work? Yeah, it looks a little strange, doesn't it? But when all this started, we didn't have a biobank in Denmark, and I didn't see really the way forward to actually engage in a European setup before we actually had something to offer, kind of. So I said, I will not be involved on the European scene before we have something to offer. We have that now. So if my government, and in particular the research ministry, will be able to fund this, I would be happy to join. But if it has to come out of my own budget, Jan Erik, and that is actually the problem with these collaborations, then I just don't have the funding for it. So, but I think we can make that up someday. But this being said, I still think that the Nordic countries should go together and make a special league. I know we don't totally agree on this, Jan Erik and I, because you now have a different hat on also. But you will never be able to work with the registries in Italy, in France, or maybe France, but certainly not in Italy and Germany, the way we do it in the Nordic. And there is this time window. And that's why I think it's okay to actually move a little faster in the Nordic, still be part of the European collaboration. And yeah, so that's my view on this.
So could I ask a very concrete question, Mats? So you will go to the government now and say, can you spend some money? How long time will that process take? That's impossible to answer, I know, but what are the range? 1 month to 2 years? Or?
I can see there are some people here from our ministry, I think, but you know, we have different ways how we fund international collaboration, and I must say that Denmark has not perhaps the best way to go forward in that regard. I think Sweden, for instance, is much better that way. We don't have a particular foundation that funds international collaboration, so it has to come out of other people's pockets, and that's always difficult. So I'm for this, for sure, but the money needs to be found, and I think it could be done quickly. It's only a matter of someone taking a decision.
One more question, Don.
Hello, my name is Karin Schmekel. I work at the Ministry of Education and Research in Stockholm. I have a question of how it is to work internationally with these issues when it comes to regulation and law. And I think that the ethic part and the legislation of on personal integrity and such is one part, and which is extremely difficult. But is there other legal or regulation obstacles in working within Europe, within this group, when you work outside the European context with NIH and so forth? Are there limitations there?
Today, yes, there are many. So I don't think we had time to talk about the Data Protection Act. Actually, this is important. But what is important with the ERIC thing is that we have a direct communication with the Commission. So we have a new way, actually, to get things happening. Yeah. So every infrastructure, it doesn't matter if it's medicine or it's physics, who got this green stamp that to be in ERIC. Then we have a door to the Commission. So I think we can change things in a way we didn't do before, or had possibility to do before.
So, yes, I think this was just right. So, thank you very much again, Jan Erik. Now we move on, and I welcome Pierre Lafolie, project leader, Nordic Trial Alliance. So please take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Erland. Dear colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, Pierre Lafolie is my name. I'm a clinical pharmacologist, which means that I'm a physician specialized in treatment with drugs. I made my first clinical trial on codeine back in '85. I do have a French name that typically concerns people, so I have a French father, yes. I'm born and raised in Stockholm. Anyway, a couple of months ago, a year ago, we started to discuss this project, the Nordic Trial Alliance, as an initiative from Norden, and which was delegated to Nordforsk for development. And we have today a funding from both these agencies for a 3-year project where we will try to increase the multitude of multinational, Nordic multinational studies, and also try to establish what have been the reasons for a decay in the number of trials and the number of output when it comes to clinical trials. So this is a way of contributing to the sustainable Nordic welfare as it is part of the sustainable welfare program from Norden. So this is just an example. I give you this one. It's the figures are ending in 2011. This shows that the number of drug trials has been decreasing, and this has been a long history of decrease in interventional clinical drug trials. If you look at the last figures, they are not yet, I couldn't get my hands on official figures, I couldn't show it to you, but you can see that for 2012 there are slight changes in the number of trials in Finland and in Denmark still, and there's still a downward slope in the other countries. This is just an example. You could pick other examples, such as the number of applications for new treatments, for new drug treatments, for new medical device treatments, etc. So typically when I try to discuss infrastructure regarding clinical studies, it is a bit tricky because there are so many difficult and different things. This is now just to give you a short view of it. We are discussing how to get the funding, how to write the protocol, how to get the statistics right, how to follow all the different quality assurance systems that are relevant for regulatory purposes. There are a lot of these things. Because these things are not always so hands-on, visual, there has been some difficulties in starting to construct the support in the infrastructure for this. I think actually Denmark was the first in the Nordic area where they started so-called cancer support centers. That was 1999-2000. They were quickly followed by so-called GCP centers. And it took more than 5 or 6 years until the other Nordic countries started to support the clinical researcher with such facilities, really. In this process, I have highlighted here the biobanking, the data management, and the statistics. And I will come back to that because these are actually fundamental needs when it comes to infrastructure support. NTA main targets are to see that we will have an increased Nordic collaborations. Today we actually do have national spread infrastructure for clinical research that is mainly provided by clinical trial units located mostly at the university hospitals. But there are very scarce Nordic such infrastructures, and when they are abundant, they are typically related to a certain or specific disease area. So we aim to have a shared and accepted common view on the clinical studies, including the research communities, patients, industry, and ministries. And I want to emphasize that industries are an essential part of this target. It's not only the academical trials we are talking about. We also aim to see what are the bureaucracy, because it's a constant complaint about the bureaucracy in this area. And we'd like to see an increased number of trials. Of course, it's not a number by itself, but an increase would also inflict that there has been some easier and more light-weighted burdens for the clinical researcher in this area. What I would like to underline that this is basically for the development of new treatments, but there are essentially scientific tools, in particular the epidemiological and statistical tools that are necessary for the evaluation of new treatments when they are out there on the market, when they are introduced. And we have to look into these aspects as well. So, well, are there systematic or randomized errors? I say this because we have identified the last couple of months that there are some concerns with respect to the registry epidemiological and data-based research, but also about tissue handling and biobanking. And this is connecting to the clinical interventional research. And what I'm saying here is that for all these areas, we have today knowledge that we do have different legislations in the different countries. And that has been confirmed from the different modalities. So you could ask yourself if this is a systematic or a randomized error. What I'm saying here is that I think that we have to find a kind of another way of getting a Nordic platform here. I was quite happy to hear when Mats proposed the Nordic cloud. I think actually that could be one way forward to get beyond the differences we have in legislation. And particularly, I think we should explore the idea of getting a Nordic agreement on mutual recognition on procedures for research ethical and ethical competent authoritative review. By such an agreement, we might be much more fitted to compete to the rest of the world by making one common Nordic research arena. And actually we are taking our next stakeholders meeting in the end of January to discuss this in more detail. Around the NTA, we do have a network. It is based on the supportive centers of the different countries, but also beyond that, research networks, individual researchers, patient organizations, but also small and medium enterprises, also big pharma, which are excluded here. We have representatives in all the countries. We have a secretariat placed at the Karolinska Institute, and we have project support from Nordforsk in Oslo. Just a snapshot, we started in April this year, and now in November we have established a secretariat, we have established a Nordic network, we have presented a call for infrastructure support projects, we have a call under preparation for support to a clinical study or eventual studies. We have a project started on a database reporting on all clinical studies that are ongoing in the Nordic area, to which we intend to invite the patient organizations, because we would like such a database to be very transparent for all patients and for all journalists, for whoever, to see what are the trials that are open, running, and actually including patients. So we also have had these initial contacts with the patient organizations, and we have identified the board members. However, they have yet not had their first meeting. So this is again to tell you that the 30th of January we will have the second stakeholder workshop with a team on how we could get forward to a common clinical research area, a common Nordic clinical research area, of course. So for more information you can find it. I put some brochures on the table in the back, and you could of course get in touch with me or look into the homepage at Nordforsk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Very good. So now there are time for questions. Comments? Yes, Mats. Good.
I think this is really something we should do, but it doesn't work, this one, I guess.
Yes.
But really to be on the forefront of clinical trials in the Nordic, it's not enough just to have, an organizational structure. We also have to have the best patients, or the right patients that we can include in these clinical trials. And the way that's done today, as I'm sure you know much better, is that you really have to actually have the genetic code behind these patients and a lot of other parameters to really make sure that this is exactly the phenotype that I want to put into this clinical study. And that's where I see things could be combined, that we have the cloud with the genetic and other background information. I know I'm going really far now, but I think that'll be the future. So we have that database structure, and then you want and need incident cases. You need them just when they enter the hospital for the first time. They will not be in that structure up there, but there will be all the background on what happened to these patients before they came in, because we have tested them earlier. So I think if that kind of system could be built, I mean, every pharmaceutical company in the world would knock on our door.
Thank you, Mats. I agree with you. And I think, as you, that we have a time window. We could be actually a leading, attracting partner if we could combine all these resources in one way.
Vad har vi nu?
Yes, please, Mika.
Okay, Mika Sheinin from Turku, Finland. Yes, I agree with both of the previous speakers, because really just to look at the number of clinical trials doesn't give the right picture. There are many untreated patients in Eastern Europe and in India and China and Brazil and South Africa, and it's easier perhaps to find patients for phase 3 clinical trials elsewhere than in our countries with small populations and well-treated patients in general. But we have special advantages. One of them is the registries and the biobanks, and if we can combine clinical trials with this background information, this is one advantage that not many other countries have. Another is our high technology that we can employ for early phase clinical trials with small numbers of patients and get a lot of information from small numbers of subjects. So we can do big studies on a population level and then small studies on a limited number of subjects with high tech. So let's really try to get it done this time.
Thank you. Could I comment on that?
Yes.
Thank you, Mika. I think you're right. We have to look into the phenotypes, and we have to see how they are responding to the different treatments we see. I mean, if we could get our horses, right now, we actually would provide a community on 25 million people. In my world, that would be only one access point, which means that you should only have one application to the ethical committee, for example, one application to the drug agency if that is needed. We have to figure out, and we have to explore this path more in detail, because I think by doing this, if it is legally applicable, we could get lost from these intricate discussions on all these different law rooms that has to be adjusted to the different countries and within the countries. So I think we have to come up with a much more smarter way of interacting. And if we could get it for the development, and if we could introduce tools also for the controlled introduction of new therapies, we would be a perfect fit for all the world to see how a new treatment will work actually, not only for the development but also on the market side.
Thank you very much. I think we have to move on. I think there are more questions, but I think they can be raised, I hope, during the panel of the final discussion. So thank you very much, Pierre. And then I welcome Kjetil Tasken to the floor. Kjetil is director for the Center for Molecular Medicine in Norway, Nordic EMBL partnership, and you are at Oslo University.
That's right.
Welcome.
So thank you for the opportunity to present the Nordic EMBO partnership in molecular medicine as a translational research infrastructure that may sort of be, or with this coordinated action that may sort of add value to translational research. So many of you will know the EMBL is a flagship institution in Europe in more than 20 member states. The main laboratories in Heidelberg. And there are then outstations that are part of the EMBL on structural biology in Hamburg and Grenoble, on most biology in Monterotondo, and very significantly the European Bioinformatics Institute in Hingsten. And altogether there's about 1,700 scientists at the EMBL and about 85 research groups. And then we started 2002, Nordic delegates to the EMBL discussing the possibility of making a partnership with the EMBL in molecular medicine. That was part of the EMBL strategy of excellence in biology. I wanted to also be able to move some of their stuff and develop collaborations in molecular medicine. And that led to this discussions, establishment of the Nordic EMBO partnership from 2007, or signed 2007, formally established from 2008, and then the establishment of 4 national centers for molecular medicine in the Nordic countries. Altogether this now, after 5 years, the FIM and MIMS being established 2008-2009, NCMM operative from 2010, and Dendrite operative from 2013. It's about 500 people, and when it reaches its full size with Dendrite, will be almost 50 research groups. 4 centers have somewhat different focus. FIM is on human genomics and personalized medicine. MIMS, it has a focus on infectious diseases and treatments, NCMM on disease mechanisms and targets, and Dendrite on neurobiology, it being also partly funded by the Lundbeck Foundation. If you look at the concept of EMBO partnerships, this is a mechanism that the EMBL has. They've developed many of them locally around there, so there are at least 4 or 5 around their outstations and the main site, and they've selected a few for more remote partnerships, one at the Center for Gene Regulation in Barcelona in Australia. The first one was the SARS Center for Marine Biology in Bergen, Norway, and then as you can see, the Nordic EMBO Partnership for Molecular Medicine is a very significant one with 4 coordinated sites. And then the objective of this partnership is to investigate molecular basis of disease and explore molecular and genetically based treatments and diagnostics, capitalizes on regional strengths in the Nordic countries. Each partner provides access to scientific infrastructure, clinical materials, networks, and training activities. We've adopted the EMBL model in terms of scientific management and selection processes. Partnership has also been financed as a Nordforsk Nordic Network of National Centers of Excellence for research, collaboration, joint scientific meetings, exchange, and strategic fora. If we visit the 4 individual sites, this is from MIMS. She's also embedded in the Umeå Center for Microbial Research, where the research focus is on molecular mechanisms of infectious diseases with new and sustainable antimicrobial strategies, and the focus on young group leaders, and all the centers have a greenhouse for young group leaders. Here's one of them that made a very significant recent discovery on the CRISPR-Cas9 system that will actually revolutionize how we can do genetic manipulations, for instance, human adult stem cells, which was not, does not work in the same way as you can manipulate mouse stem cells, for instance. Here's from FIM and showing one flagship project that they're running at the moment on acute myelogenic leukemia, where they source all their genomics resources and chemical biology resources to look at patients, and several times during the disease where they get relapses, they do molecular profiling, those do drug screens, and particularly drug screens, drug sensitivity can feed back directly to the patient, whereas this is more of a learning exercise where they gather data at the moment. It's from NCMM. As a center developed, we have a focus on cancer, neurodegenerative inflammatory diseases. It's reached its full size. There are highlights coming out, for instance, transcription landscape of prostate cancer, understanding the blood-brain barrier, and interstitial brain circulation. And here from Dendrite, which has a very strong background based in Aarhus University in membrane structural biology, with Paul Nissen, and neurobiology and neurophenotyping, and also where the first group leaders started. So together, these 4 centers have a lot of capacity and expertise in the translational medicine area. They also have a lot of local infrastructures. Some are specialized and where there's complementarity. Genomics on the FIM side here, metabolomics, chemical biology, strong across these 3 sites, structural biology and mouse imaging, for instance, very strong here and in the Norwegian site, and connect to a lot of national infrastructures. And then these also involve machines and physical infrastructure that the centers have. Here are some of them, some of the genomics, some of the phenotyping. Here is medical imaging at FIM, where they really revolutionize some of the processing of pathological samples, for example. looking at this in a European scale, looking at the S3 biomedical sector, where really all the infrastructures are, compared to physics, for instance, quite small, and they come together like this, and they're quite interlinked. We also see that our Nordic EMBO partnership linked to many of these European infrastructure. For some of them, we've had the national role in the preparatory phase, like EU OpenScreen, where FIM, MIMS, and NCMM are all together, and also together with the EMBL, or IATRIS, where FIM and NCMM have been involved, BBMRI, where FIM is also intimately linked, and to others of these we link through national networks. The Nordic EMBO partnership has a number of activities that are across the Nordic regions. It's a strategic forum at the director level in the steering committee with the EMBL. It's a cooperative positioning on European arena and European infrastructure initiatives. We have benefit of joint recruitment processes to attract top talent. We've had great benefit of the Nordforsk Network of Excellence grant for exchange, joint courses, network meetings, scientific retreats. It's still growing. Denmark joined in 2013. It's more complete, and there's no time limit now for this EMBO partnership. The first partnership agreement ran for 5 years. The second partnership agreement is now extended for another 10 years. It was signed this spring. So in summary, this is a partnership set up to capitalize on European Nordic investments in molecular biology, and by extending this to medicine. It's participation in an organized structure for collaboration with the EMBL and inside the Nordic member countries. It's an organized structure to effectively translate discoveries in molecular medicine. It's ideally positioned for cross-border coordinated exploitation of some of the things that we've seen earlier in this session, and where some of the researchers in the centers would and have projects that would tap into this domain. It's also positioned to attract top talent and to educate specialists in molecular medicine translational research, and also to facilitate collaboration. That was what I had planned to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. So there is, again, time for questions and discussions. Please. Right. No one? It was, yes. So we all agree on the added value, and that's it. Well, thank you very much. There will be possibility for discussion and comments later on. So, so now we move over to my presentation of the work in NORIA-NET on registers. Are they done? I don't know. So I will now give a presentation of the work done in NORIA-NET called, well, the working title is called the Nordic Data Sharing Framework. And these are the members of the group. And I have shared this group together with Mikael Fogelholm at the University of Helsinki. You see the members of the group here: Ilmo Keskimäki from Finland, Jan-Erik Litton, Sweden, Salva Nördal, Iceland, Jörn Olsson, Denmark, Juni Palmgren, Sweden, Elisabeth Rinning, Uppsala, Sweden. Actually, she left during the project period and went to be a judge at the Administrative High Court in Sweden. Stig Slördal from Norway, Eskil Wadensjö, Sweden, and Marjut Salokanen, Finland. So first, very briefly about the NORIA-NET as a structure. It's a preparatory action for national and Nordic research funding agencies and policymakers. And this particular Norianet was started in 2011, 2012 after decision by the Nordforsk board. And both social and health registers and biobanks have been included in our mission. So it encompasses everything that is of relevance to registers in this very wide sense. The ambition was to give strategic advice to the Nordforsk board on how to increase Nordic cooperation on registry-based research. And a final report will be delivered in 2 weeks' time. The aim was to enhance joint use of Nordic registers for research. And to repeat, we know that if combining, we get a population of about 25 million people. There will be increased quality of research, for sure, and we can deliver evidence basis for policy and political decisions. And it would attract international researchers and the research interest and policy interest as well. And to do this, we need a number of things. We need harmonization of practices. We need to overcome obstacles, hindrances, ethical, technical, and we need long-term commitment of funding and policymakers. And this is a theme which has been recurrent already this morning in this session. There was already at the time when we started a very interesting and important publication by Marie Sandberg, Reinforced Nordic Collaboration on Data Resources. And there were identified a number of obstacles, hindrances, barriers. Ethical, legal, technical, political, financial, organizational. One step on the way to today in this Norianet was that a conference here in Stockholm, Sweden, in March, a Nordic Council of Ministers conference, an expert meeting, responsible data sharing across borders. And some of you were there and were active already there. So there was an analysis of the current legal situation as a result of that conference with regard to sharing data across borders in the Nordic countries. And there was a proposal in a draft report for a Nordic data sharing framework. And there is more information to be found on Nordforsk's homepage concerning the results and outcome of this conference, which was very successful, I think. We proposed that the Nordic countries should adopt a number of measures in order to set up a Nordic data sharing framework. Applicable Nordic laws relating to data sharing will have to be synchronized to make it possible to share and combine data within a research project across registers and across borders. And this involves, again, then data protection, ethical issues, reviews, statistics, biobanks, and so on. And a very specific suggestion was to have an ethical permission that would be valid in all countries. We'll come back to that issue later on. And only one authorization of data protection of the data would be necessary and required for each and every research project. And each country should ensure that research data is properly anonymized or pseudonymized according to high standards of technical nature. And responsible should be the hosting organization or another equally responsible organization. Pseudonymization then implies encryption of data, and key with a trusted organization at the national level. And we also have suggestions concerning the bureaus of statistics, which there are in each country. So microdata in need of linking to other registers based on data and across borders. The statistics authority of the country in question, of the research organization, where the principal investigator belongs, should be in charge of anonymization or pseudonymization of the data. And after that procedure, the statistics authority should deliver the data to the principal investigator to be utilized in the research project. And then the investigator could deliver key-coded data to other researchers, and the responsibility for proper handling should follow that researcher or researchers, complying to the specific regulations and laws of the country. And furthermore, the Nordforsk should in various ways and facilitate this change of procedures and putting into place the necessary requirements for fulfilling this vision. And again, we come back to the issue of the ethics board. And the ideal then would be to have a procedure where one board in one country evaluates the application and says yes or no. And given a yes, it should be valid then in all the Nordic countries. And in a similar way, the statistics authority should combine data sets from all countries and other register hosting organizations. And the statistics authorities would then recognize that the level of protection in the Nordic countries is equivalent to their own. So it's the recurrent theme is that harmonization should take place in all these fields of relevance and of critical importance for making registers available for high quality research. And the impression from the conference in March was that the bureaus of statistics in the Nordic countries are able to receive data from other countries. But it was not so clear whether they could also send out data to other countries. In some cases it was clear, we think, that they cannot do that. But in connection to the conference in March, the Bureau of Statistics decided to set up a task force to discuss and move forward the issues which were raised during the conference, and also part of our report to Nordforsk. And there was also ethics dialogue initiated. Same issue as before. Is it possible at all to accomplish a harmonization of the ethical vetting in the different countries? And the situation is very different in the different countries. In Sweden, we have since 2004 a law regulating this. Before that, it was a situation which seems to be the case in Finland now, with a variety of ethical vetting systems. So there is a real need for harmonization. And concerning the data inspection authorities, our group then follows what happens concerning the European Data Protection Regulation closely, and we will come back to that issue later on. So now we come to the recommendations which will be done in this final report. It's not actually there yet, but in 2 weeks' time it has to be there. You recognize a certain similarity between these recommendations and what has been distributed beforehand, and you have now on paper on the steps to be taken and the general statement from this very session. So, follow the processes of harmonization of the statistical bureaus, the EU data protection, and the ethical boards. And there's a very concrete suggestion to set up a research program to pilot improved joint use of registers. Piloting is essential. Now it's time to take a step forward, referring to the presentation by Lars Börjesson, for example, yesterday, that in 2008 there was a similar conference to this one, and what has happened since then. Well, maybe we are more brave now in the sense that we suggest certain very concrete things and step forwards. And could there be then, as a vision, a Nordic consortium for register-based research or a Nordic Center for Register-Based Research? So we come back to the issue of the Nordic pilots. And then the BBMRI could be used as a model, but the focus should be on health and welfare as a complement to what is already going on in the BBMRI. And when starting this, it also implies starting the discussions of what has to be harmonized even further than already is the case. And this pilot study should then be funded in the usual way, peer reviews, competition, and during a 3-year period. Example of registers are really unnecessary to mention in this audience, I suppose, but nevertheless, there are social ones which we call them, and there are health ones. So there are a lot of registers, databases created by researchers in the social sciences, for example, longitudinal ones, cross-sectional ones of relevance for education, labor market, migration, demography, and so on and so forth. And we have patient registers, prescription registers, cancer, etc., all familiar to you in the health area. And researchable questions are really very, very many and very, very important. That is, of course, the underlying reason for promoting this kind of steps for improving possibilities for doing cross-country research. Very important policy issues. Employment, unemployment, education, migration, the relations between these variables, causes of mental health illness, for example. So this is the remaining question with 2 question marks. A Nordic Center or Nordic Consortium, rather, as it was called in the previous slide. Is that a reasonable vision? So that was the report from the Noria Net on registers. So thank you very much. So if there are some questions, comments already to this, there is some time, but there is also a panel waiting. So, but there are some questions. Fine.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Thompson from Stockholm University. I'm a sociologist and demographer, so it was nice to finally see some reference to non-medical data. But the model that you have here is very different from Matt's model. And the idea that you have to construct, organize, figure out your data set, and then you go through all this, and then you get it delivered. Probably in Sweden, we wouldn't even get it on our computer. We'd get it through Mona, or remote access. So that's a different model in terms of doing the best research we can do at the moment the questions change and new information becomes more salient to our research. Do you just think that's as far as we can go at this point? Or did the group consider the more completely interactive researcher with some access to a platform that allows you to go and get the variables you need after you've thought it out ahead and discovered what you need?
No, we left it with 2 question marks, we can say, because that is the next step, if I understand you correctly. A consortium or center or something which allows similar procedures that are already available in other circles. So we have concentrated at defining what has to be overcome in terms of, let's say, harmonization of the various parts that needs to be taken care of.
CGM Statistics Sweden. I think the main difference between Mats examples and the other countries is that primarily you have a legislation since was May 2012 or something that allows you to have a copy of all the, in your case, medical data. We had that suggestion in Bengt Westerberg, but we didn't come through that time. But still you have the problem with you only had the medical data in Denmark. You're not allowed to have the social data as a complement to your data. But still, you're discussing a harmonization of the legislation. And I can see another problems with that. The basic definition of how an authority should handle the data that they are in possession of is that we as a statistical agency, we allow you to access data that we have had a copy of. And you, Mats, for instance, you will probably do the same thing. But nevertheless, you suggested that the PIs should take over that role. That's actually changed the legislation basis for all the Nordic countries. I think that could be a problem, actually.
So I just wonder, what do you see as the main objective for a Nordic Center? Would that be to serve researchers and open up the registries in all the countries and streamline this, or would this be for people that want to explore that they would go to the center? Would this be a service center or a research center?
More the first one you described, but this is really the last thing we have touched upon, so this is not thought through. But again, but more the first one.
But I think at least if one mission was that there would be a tremendous interest for exploiting such a center. So I think that's because I think there are obstacles, and if they could be solved in a centralized way, there would be a lot of drive to utilize such a resource from where I stand anyway.
Thank you very much. I certainly will be in favor of any progress forward for collaboration, and this is certainly one suggestion. I'm concerned that time is running, and the fact that talking about harmonization in the Nordic countries, I've been traveling around the Nordic talking about this for many, many years, and actually what I see right now is that in Sweden you're going the opposite direction. You're not going the right direction, despite all these arguments that we have put forward over and over again. We just went through 3 trials in Sweden to get access to blood bank data. After 4 years, we now have the okay to update a large Danish-Swedish blood bank initiative. But it took 4 years because of the legislation in Sweden. Therefore, I mean, still this being a suggestion, couldn't we look at this in a different way? I mean, we have the e-science program in the Nordic right now. We are really out there with respect to knowledge in IT. So why don't we combine that with what is possible and then make the cloud solution? Make people decide in each country how they deal with this and then put it up in the cloud to the extent they can. I think you can go forward with this, but I think we need to be more ambitious than that. And we have to move fast. And I'm sure you can solve this.
Actually, must we partly done that because we, together with Finland, now are building a cloud. But we come back to these regulations that does things very difficult for us. And we maybe should mention also when we started these things up, it was closer to be an act than a regulation. And then the Nordic country had an enormous possibility to actually harmonize legislation. So that's one of the reasons it started. But now we might have a regulation which could make life difficult. So we have people actually working because we also have a big European project now for a biobank cloud. We have done the cloud, we have done the software, it's there. But we end up with those, questions, and especially Sweden, you're right.
And I only have one more comment then, which is when you talk about harmonization, I really get afraid. I get afraid that this will have an impact negatively on the Danish attitude to these things. To harmonize, do we need to harmonize? I mean, I don't think harmonization is the right word. What you really want is to put up the countries that don't have the legislation as we have in Denmark to a level where you can collaborate between the countries, not to harmonize us down to a different level. You see that? So I would really argue against using harmonization as a word here.
It has been, that particular concept has been discussed in our network, in the Norianet, so yes. But one final question, and then we go over to the panel.
This is more of a comment. I think it's valuable to think in terms of not being so fragmented. To me, it is a fragmentation if we are dividing the biobanking issue from the registry issue, from the ethical reviews of clinical trials. I think we should have a common system, and the basic key for this is actually the ethical approvals and how we have the consent from the patients and individuals to participate. So if we could arrange this, and I think that is possible to do by agreements, and we have to explore this road, of course. If we can do that, I guess that we could have a solution to propose eventually for the politicians. But on the other hand, you are a good benchmark now, Denmark, and if you are going to work with other guys who are not in the lead as you are, you might actually think that it is a step backwards. So that's part of the deal, probably.
Thank you very much. So now I envisage that this discussion will now continue in a very smooth way in the panel, because we have now raised evidently very important issues. So I call upon the panel now. Vigdis, Niels, Salver, Mats again, and Marjut. Fick vi någon lista på de här? Nej, det fick nej. Ja, det kan jag. Precis. Ja, just det. Ja, just det. So there you have a microphone there, very good. And we have from right to left, Vigdis Namtvedt Kvalheim, Associate Director of the Norwegian Social Science Data Service. Niels Plog, Director, Social Statistics, Statistics Denmark. Mads Melby, introduced several times already, Director, Statens Serum Institute, Denmark. Salvar Nordahl, Director, Center of Ethics, Iceland University. And Marjut Salukannel, Consultant in Information Law. So, yeah, you have the sun. We will... Too much sun on Salvar. We'll see if we can do something about that. So we have suggested 3 minutes of comments from each of you, starting from the right then, on is this possible, which was the conclusions from my presentation. Is it even something that is worth striving for, considering the discussion that we had already now and before the panel? And if they are something to strive for, what should be done? If they are not something to strive for, what should be done instead? So please, Vigdis.
Yes. I want to start with my first encounter with research infrastructures. Do you hear me now? My background is from the National Norwegian Data Service. And in 1981, that's quite many years ago, I started as a student to work at NSD, and my work was actually to prepare data for something called the Nordic Regional Time Series Database for Time Series. And it's actually there, and its coverage is from 1945 to 1989, but then it stopped. And it was funded by Nordic money. So, of course, I definitely could support your suggestion that we have to build databases for research, not only in the medicine and health sciences, but not the least also in the social and economic sciences. And actually, I will be as bold as to say that the medical and health sciences actually have a lot to learn from the social sciences in this field, because the social sciences in the world and in Europe has national infrastructures with strong institutional support from national government, from national research councils, from the universities and colleges, and from the researcher since the mid-60s and until today. So even though no one talked about infrastructure, but they talked about data archives and data services, especially within the Nordic countries, we have a long tradition to build infrastructure, multifunctional infrastructure, and that relates a little bit to what we are discussing here. The model you presented in your presentation, to a very large extent, described the situation in Norway as of today. And I think it's right, it's important that we try to solve these multifaceted problems which have complex diagnosis. It's not only legal barriers or ethical barriers. It's the question of the quality of the data, standardization of data production, not least the lack of metadata and documentation, and so on and so forth. And what we all know is that the old solutions access mechanism does not work. So we have to find new solutions. And not necessarily always because they're not successful. Yesterday and today we heard that we have to build on the good examples. We have to look for the good example. And I have not heard a lot about the national research infrastructure for social sciences. You have the Danish data archive, you have the Finnish data service, you have the Swedish national data service, you have the Norwegian national data service, operating for 50 years with a lot of experience within this field. In Norway, we have 40 years of experience with cooperation with Statistics Norway. We're talking a lot about register data, and there's administrative data, big data for the social sciences. We have to go and look for the good examples. And actually, one reason why we're looking into the models Mats here presented today for cooperation between Statistics Norway and NSD in increasing the capacity, delivering data from Statistics Norway to the researcher. It's not because Statistics Norway haven't done it before. On the contrary, it's to build capacity. Yesterday, it was said that we are few researchers in this region. We are more together. So we need to have a proper division of labor. And looking at, for instance, the Census Bureau, you have to go to, for instance, Norway to see why is it that in Norway researchers actually have all these data on their desktop. They get access to, you couldn't believe it when you know about how much data they get from the going direct to Statistics Norway. And also there is a formal agreement or cooperation where Statistics Norway disseminate data through the National Social Science Data Service. So we don't have much time, so to summarize. And also, that's a great success, but we don't have enough researchers getting access. It takes 2 years. It costs a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort, but the Data Protection Authority will give their approval, Ethical Board will give their approval, but it takes time. That's why we're working together with Statistics Norway with the funding of the National Research Council, big funding through the infrastructure money to make some new ways to move beyond the law, to get, not that the law is difficult, but to get up the volume of research, increase the volume of research.
Well, thank you very much, Vigdis.
Yes.
Niels, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. As an economist, I'm quite secure to being in a room with so many medical doctors, because I'm sure if I become ill, I will be given the right treatment, and it will be registered and put in the registers immediately. But it makes me want to second one of the previous speaker's points, namely that there's also a story for register data for the social sciences, and I think that's very important too. Now, I'm the director of social statistics at Statistics Denmark. That means that I am the head of an organization that are producing social statistics for population, employment, education, crime, social welfare, based on an integrated statistical system that for 95% of the information is based on data from registers. It's a very efficient way of doing statistics. It's also a very cheap way if we compare Statistics Denmark's production costs with the production costs of other national statistical institutions in the Nordic countries and in Europe. So we are very happy with the system we have, and we are very happy to share it. That is why we for 25 years have had a unit at Statistics Denmark that have given access to our data, our register-based data for researchers. And I'm happy to say that that is one of our successes. It has had an increased use by social scientists and also by scientists from health. And we are very happy to participate in any form of expansion of that. Now, if you want to have a register-based system that can be used both for statistics but also for research, you need not only to have a population register, you also need to have a housing register and a business register. We do have that, and other Nordic countries have it too. So I totally share the vision that was put forward, namely that we in the Nordic countries have a competitive advantages in relation to the use of the register data we have. Also for research, we use them already through the production of statistics. And when it comes to the social data, having taken part in the European Statistical Cooperation for 5 years now, I'm not that worried, because nobody south of the Danish border will never be able to have register-based data neither on population nor on housing or business. So in that relation, we have an advantage, and of course we should use that advantage. So I share the vision, including the proposals put forward in Erlend's presentation. There's a point I would like to make, namely that we are talking about easy access to data. And that is very important. It's important that researchers can have easy and as immediate access to data as possible. But I also think that we should not forget easy use of data. And easy use of data also calls upon documentation. That means metadata, information on the data that we have. And I think we sometimes tend to forget that. In order to have a well-functioning system, it's also important to have resources to document the data. That's the experience we have in Denmark. We have a special documentation system for the data that are in our register that are mostly used by researchers, and they are very happy about that. And it makes it much easier also for newcomers to take advantage of the huge possibilities that exist in the data that we have. So I think that's an important point to emphasize. In Erlend's presentation, it was mentioned that the directors of the Nordic Statistical Institutions decided at their meeting in August in Norway to create a task force that would look into some of the problems that has been raised also in the debate here. And that's right, there is such a task force, and I will not be able to predict what kind of solutions they will come up with, but I can say that in the task that the task force is given, they are asked to take into consideration a number of the problems that has been raised here. The task force has also been given a very short time limit to work on. The idea is that they should be able to come up with something in February next year. Statistical institutions and statisticians are kind of practical people, so I think they will come up with a number of, I hope, practical solutions to some of the problems raised here. Now, as statisticians, we love our data, and therefore we also love people who would like to use our data. But sometimes that love is not mutual. And that has to do with the fact that we are, in some cases, preoccupied with data security in ways that people sometimes find intimidating, as if we are suggesting that they will misuse our data. We just have to take care of that. That's one of the things that is important for statistical institutions, including discretion in relation to the use of data. So there are issues here that we have to find solutions to. And we are occupied with that because we are legally, that's a legal obligation for us to be that, but we're also occupied with it because we think that one of the reasons that we actually have the very efficient data systems we have in the Nordic countries is that people who actually are registered there have a trust in the fact that the data are used for good purposes and not for bad purposes. And unfortunately, sometimes there are situations where data that can be led back to a specific individual are out there in the open where they should not be, and that is why we occupy with that. And I think we have a common interest also in securing data security and discretion in relation to the use of data. And that's one of the areas where we maybe kind of disagree, statisticians on the one hand and the users of our data on the other hand. Thank you very
much. Mats again, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. My ministry is primarily focused on collecting all this data for one purpose, that is the patient. So the patient is the focus where I come from. And if we can't do something for that person, I mean, they would not be interested. For that reason, it is important that in health, that we can work with personal identifiable data, that we can go from the public databases back to the hospital, pull out a group of patients and study them forward in time, or to a biobank, or actually looking into the files and see if they are correct. Let me just then change the scene a little and say that I come a lot at Stanford University these days. And every time I go there, it's a wake-up call for me, because they are so much ahead of us in the way they think about using data of all sorts. They have the best IT school in the world. They have very, very good geneticists and informatics people and medical people as well. So they are building these databases, even though they don't have the legislation really to work the way we can do it. One thing they are building is a system like a patient like mine, or at least they would like to do it. And a patient like mine system is something that we should also consider building here. So now I'm going a little step forward in suggesting stuff. We have the most marvelous setup with respect to detailed data on how we take care of the patient. And we could, in a public-private partnership, build a database called A Patient Like Mine, a Google system, where that would work like this. You're sitting in your GP practice. You have examined the patient, found out what kind of symptoms he has. You have perhaps even done some paraclinical work up, so you have some lab results, but you don't know what the diagnosis is. But you put that into your record system, and immediately comes out over here 15 patients that have exactly the same situation, but where they have worked on these patients for 2 more months, and they came up with a good diagnosis. Now this GP, sitting somewhere in northern part of Sweden or wherever, has the best knowledge just in front of him on the screen, because this database will provide him now with very good suggestions for what the patient he has in front of him actually suffers from. That system can be built in our societies because we also have very good IT people. We have an e-science structure that really is marvelous. But we are not going that way. I mean, we are doing things the classical way in these countries, and I think we are not ambitious enough. So when I just saw this suggestion before, how we link up data, fine. But that is not the future. The future is still the cloud. The future is still that we can share based on our own premises in this cloud, and then again take out what is needed. Back to the clinic. So we should be able to first work in the cloud with all the different registries, and then define a cohort, a clinical trial setup that we then should be able to take out again and go into the hospital setup system. And I'll still go, forward with that suggestion, even though I know there are some challenges, because if we don't push this, I'm not sure that we will, at least 10 years down the road, be in front of the game. So be more ambitious. Thank you.
Thank you, Mats. Salvar?
Thank you. Often when we are talking about these things, we start, or people of course raise the ethical questions, and there are many ethical issues, and one thing that we are dealing with is that we have a framework for research, framework that we have been using now for years, and it has of course several and important limitations. And one thing of course that has been developing over the past maybe 10, 15 years is the informed consent. I mean, we have that is what we have been basing our regulation on, and our ethical principles. And but still, I mean, the consent forms have been changing, and we have been moving from informed consent to broad consent to open consent, and now dynamic consent. And I think that shows that the ethicists and the ethical questions and the principles are really developing with the technology and the new knowledge and everything. So I think we can see that now, that there are many people who are developing ethical framework that can sort of combine with this new way. And I think one of the issues is the new, or sort of the latest development with dynamic consent, which is the idea there is that this is sort of interrelational. So the consent is giving over a time, and people can follow up on how the data is used. Because I think we are in a period where the framework that we have been using, where we have to, as Mads was explaining also in his the new system they have, that we can't know at the right at the beginning. Researchers can't know what is most interesting to do and lay out the research project. They have to be able to access the data and then come up with a proposal. And so I think we have a unique opportunity here in the Nordic countries to try to, in this, when we take this step of working together and centralize a database, to also build a structure that is based on these principles. And on these sort of latest, I think, I can say sort of ethical development, or people who are really up front in this area. And I think we can do that, because I think that is also a way to keep the social dialogue going. Because I mean, one thing that we have here in the Nordic countries is tremendous trust towards research, and we have to preserve that. We have to go along with the public. People are knowledgeable about what is going on, and being able to follow up on what is being done, and so that it's transparent what's being done, and people can access the information. And with this technology, I think people are. It's possible to do that. One more thing before we well, yeah, on another thing, I mean, and I wanted to ask Mads, maybe we can take that up later. I mean, in their system, is it possible, because that's one thing that is being discussed a lot, and especially just in the recent months, is the question of if individuals are able to get back information. So are they? How is it with the information going back to the individuals, so they can actually benefit from the research? How are we going to do that in this kind of system? And do you is that possible within your system? I was just wondering when I was listening. And also, I mean, and then but we have a present framework. We have biobanks, for instance, where information has been collecting based on informed consent, and we are in I think we are sort of in a transition period. I mean, in some countries at least, there are informed consent based biobanks, and how are we going to take the step to use these biobanks or collect or connect them with other information? I think there are several questions like that. I think they can't be solved, but we have to go through this discussion and find the way to do this.
Marjut, final panel.
Thank you. Now comes the law. But the law is not about the problems, it's about the solutions, I think. And I found Mats Mellby's idea of the Nordic cloud especially intriguing. We haven't discussed that. We sort of, in our working group, what we have discussed is sort of the first phase, and then the sort of the ultimate solution or the goal would be the Nordic cloud, and there we would have to have the IT people to do the proper anonymization and linking of data. But coming back to the data protection issue, because the proposal of the European Commission for the European data protection package, and in particular the data protection regulation, which after having been accepted will be directly applicable law in all the member states. The main idea behind that regulation is that it wants to enhance the free movement of data, including research data, within the European Union while respecting the individual's right to data protection, which is protected as an independent right in the European Charter of Human Rights. And so this is not about preventing research, it's something that would make it possible. And the main principle, regardless of the different versions we have seen of the data protection regulation, is that, and this is about when we are using data without the consent, which applies to, for example, to register-based data. The main principle is that when the data is either anonymized or pseudonymized, it can be used on cross-border basis without the consent from the data subjects. And this would mean that when the freedom of information laws in the respective Nordic countries tell us that data is public, the data can always be used for research purposes if it's anonymized or pseudonymized in a secure way. In the recent Parliament's proposal, it demanded more for health data. But nothing, even in that proposal, was something that I could have seen as preventing our proposal to come true. And then I heard some suggestions and comments about going beyond, sort of beyond the current discussion, and in particular with regard to also the situation in Stanford. And they also have the best legal people there at the university. And when we enter the age of big data, which we have been speaking about all over, and when we want to see our framework in that realm, there's a new legal thing, which is something that which is very specific for the Nordic countries, and that's copyright. We haven't discussed that yet, but that enters into the discussion when we discuss data mining, data and text mining, using data analytics in big data. And this means that even if all the freedom of information laws, data protection laws, everything is in order, under the current Nordic copyright laws, the database owner, the register owner, has a possibility to set restrictions on the use of the database if they want to, set conditions, because they have the copyright on that. And this is because the Nordic copyright laws do not contain an exception for the benefit of research uses of copyrighted data. And this is particularly difficult for database protection, which covers in practice everything. And for example, in the US, they have this fair use exception, which covers, for example, by the recent decision, the Google Books, it covers data and text mining for research purposes without exception. And most European countries have this sort of exception in their copyright laws. And the UK is now proposing that also at the European level, we should have an exception in the copyright laws, particularly permitting data and text analysis, not only for non-commercial uses, but also for all sorts of research uses, just like the research exceptions in the data protection regulation. This is something that which is not sort of, doesn't concern us in this project, but it may concern us in the future, and something I want to throw up for future work. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you very much. Very, very interesting comments, and very important ones. So I suggest we do the following now, because we have to comment on the preliminary statements, recommendations, and we should have time to do that, so we have something that we can claim was more or less, not unanimous perhaps, but some expression from this session concerning what to do in the future, not least, and how to proceed. So if we could have these preliminary statements on the screen, and then I think, can you sit there without breaking your neck and looking at the screen? So I suggest simply that we work through these points. They are 6, sorry. So, and I give the floor first to the panel for very short comments, and then the audience in its entirety. So first point in the plan, catalyzed processes for Nordic research support operations carried out by the Nordic Bureau of Statistics. So what do you say about that? The panel. Right, yes, Mats?
Yeah, I guess I have to say that this is not necessarily the way I would go, but that's because I'm in a different institution, so I'm not objective here. I would certainly, if I worked with health data, work with the setup that we have at my institute, because you would get much better data, updated data every day, but you would also be able to take out the data and contact the individuals afterwards. Okay.
Could you say, it's very difficult now to hear because of the sail out there. Could you summarize what you just said?
No, I'm just saying that, I mean, why put that it has to be the Nordic Bureaus of Statistics? It should be just be, I mean, a national institution. And I acknowledge that I'm not objective here because I come from another institution than the Statistics Bureau in Denmark, but I think that we have better health data and more updated data. We can provide them every day updated, and we get a tremendous amount of new data in the future that could be used for science in the Nordic. And in our institution, we can actually give out data easily.
Right, yes.
There are differences between the Nordic countries of what the national statistical institutes are doing, but I think in the areas where they're working, I think they should play a crucial role in relation to giving access to data for research purposes. And I think that would be a very good recommendation that in the areas where they work and do the collection and dissemination of data, that they should also play a role. And there's a difference between giving out data and giving access to data, but I think at the end of the day, it might be the same thing for the researchers. And what we do is that we give direct access, remote access to data, so researchers can work on them. And as far as I know, and I've heard, that's what they're working on in Norway too. So I think that should be part of the recommendation, that the NSI should be engaged in this process.
Yes, yes, Vigdis, yes.
Yes, I agree with Nils that the NSI should be involved in the process, but I also think you should look outside the Nordic country to see what's going on. It's right that we have a comparative advantage, and we also have some examples of remote access, and also according to different legislation like Statistics Norway, which can hand out data to researchers as well. So I think we have to have several thoughts in our head at the same time. One solution will not necessarily mean that the other solution will disappear, this direct access and like you said, Mats, delivering out data. But we have to work on more technical solution. And for instance, we've been talking about linking up to ASFRI projects, and we've been talking about looking outside Nordic countries. And there's a project going on today, Data Without Boundaries, easy funded, a lot of money. And what is it about? It's about one thing only, to strengthen one of the ASFRI infrastructure, the Council of European Social Science Data Archives, and their operation linking up with the National Statistical Agency and building bridges and cooperation. We've been talking about cooperation, and I will not go for the model with the old model only focusing on the National Statistical Agency, but focusing on the cooperation between the national research infrastructure and the national statistical agencies.
Thank you. And any comments from the audience? Yes, from this. Well, I don't know if I need a microphone. It's coming.
Thank you. So I'm Ulf Hansen. I work at a pharmaceutical company called MSD, which is the second largest in the world. And I particularly like Mads Melby's comments because I think that we look at data at groups and we try to make conclusions. In the future, we will look at individuals. So we have to go another way. If we look at the big clinical trials, you talk about money. We spend between $100 and $200 million on the normal phase 4 clinical trials. Think about if we could collect that data on individual level without giving out, of course, the personnel behind the data. Instead of doing that, you would have so much money to do your research, so you didn't want to know what to do with it. So I think that we have to look at what we try to do here, and I'm not an expert, I don't know anything about this. We look at what we have today and try to make it better, rather than to look at what we would like to have tomorrow, like Mats tried to describe. So I think please take that into consideration.
Thank you. Right, so I think we move on to the second point in the plan. It's been touched upon already, discussed, how to handle the different ethical procedures in the different Nordic countries. So anything from the panel? Mats again, yes?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we agreed on the first one, but you moved on.
No.
I would say, or similar national organizations in the first line. That way you could actually cover both the statistics bureaus and other similar national organizations, because this will change all the time. But I mean, if Nordforsk will do it this way, be my guest. For the next line here and the next again, you talk about harmonizing, and I would actually suggest that we change that to here encourage improved possibilities for procedures for collaboration between the Nordic ethical review boards instead of harmonization. And in the third, again, catalyze improved possibilities for Nordic legislation. Instead of harmonizing is, for me, not the right word.
So what is the right word?
So instead, put in improved possibilities for.
So it's again, yes, fine, yes, okay.
But the idea here is to have it to change the law in the way that we can have only one ethical board reviewing a proposal of this sort, rather than having, as it is now, from each and every country. And if we go to one board, we need to harmonize. We need to have a similar views on the. So it's more than improving. It is going a step further. I think improving is not the right word either. I think we are talking about taking the next step and really one board can deal with all.
But if we do it this way, can you see the Swedes allowing the Danish ethical boards deciding how Swedish data should be taken care of? I mean, they could only do that if they actually change their own view on this issue, okay? Which would mean restricting compared to what they do today. And that's why I don't want harmonization, because it really makes things worse in Denmark. And I don't see the purpose for that.
No, it's I think Marjut now, and I think we deal also now with the legal framework, don't we? So ethical and legal. So please, Marjut, yes.
Well, just to comment the word harmonize, I know it raises sentiments, and I would propose, because Salvador is correct, in this case it's going further. One permission should be valid, regarded as valid in all the rest of the Nordic countries. And what about approximation of laws to the extent that it's possible to regard one, so it doesn't have to be exactly the same. And same, in fact, applies to the laws in general, but we also have to take into consideration that we have the EU law, and first we have the EU law, which is the regulation, but it still leaves some leeway to the member states, in particular when dealing with scientific research. And that leeway should be used in a way that the Nordic laws could be in a synchrony. They could be synchronized in a manner that we could use our data in concert through, for example, a Nordic cloud.
Yeah, I think yes, from the audience, yes, please.
I have 2 points. First, I think the headline should be including of clinical trials, which is to say I should also include interventional studies. That was the first point. The second point, which we are discussing, the encouragement of harmonized procedures. I think we have already forgotten that we have evidence that there are so many obstacles in the legislations in the different countries that we have to realize that if we are continuing this path, looking into the different legislations, we will only contribute to the fragmentation. We actually must look into other ways of doing this. And this is why I think NORAD came up with a very good proposal in that term that we should invest if the mutual recognition procedures would be applicable in terms of ethical approvals for us. Because that, I think, would be a golden path if it is possible.
Thank you. Yes, short comment.
Yes, and we're talking about legislation and practice, and we don't have to. We shouldn't forget practice. That's been conducted on EC level research projects with regard to the implementation of the data directive, medical and health research, and the main finding was that even though legislation was more or less harmonized, practice was differentiated. So we have to focus on practice. And that's why I think this is a very good recommendation. Even though we don't harmonize laws, every law we got, the work that is being done on EC level at the moment as we speak really show that we need, on a national level, on a Nordic level and a European level, bodies that follow the legal development and implementation. Most of you probably don't know that the first draft of this legislation from the EC Commission was quite good for research in that it kept most of the research exemptions with regard to use of registers, for instance, without consent. Then Albrecht came and he stripped away the proposal to the Parliament, stripped away all research exemption, actually arguing that research was not such a high public interest that it needed special protection within the European legal framework. And this, of course, was damaging for research, especially the research we're talking about here today. And now there's a new proposal. The Civil Liberties made their proposal, the negotiating document, and the new legislation is due in May next year, April, May. And the research exemption, by and large, is back into the proposal, but not all of it. And especially with regard to consent and some other important issues, there are still issues to be improved. And a body like proposed here is something that could follow this development. One thing that is good for us, all of us, infrastructures for research, that is no new thing in the new draft to the Parliament, is there's a new provision actually for data archives, allowing data to be kept forever in data archives. and for all infrastructure, whether they are in medical and health or that's something useful. So this, we need this.
Yes, thank you. Is this a comment on the legal issues? Yes, please, very good. So 2 more, then we move on, I think. So.
EU law, there's this new legislation coming up on clinical trials on pharmaceuticals, and then we have the data protection and privacy legislation in the EU. Can you tell me, is this mutual recognition procedure by ethics committees, is it actually legally possible by EU law at the moment, or would EU law have to be changed? Another alternative would be to form the union again, which we had several centuries ago, but I don't think that's possible either.
Yes, in fact, the data protection regulation doesn't include anything about it. It doesn't require any ethical review. And the clinical trials regulation, the version of the Parliament report has introduced it. And the purpose is to make it easier, to only have one permission for the clinical trials within a project, that you don't have to have it from all the participating countries. So I think that not knowing what's going to be the outcome of the clinical trials regulation, I think that it would sort of be in favor of our mutual recognition project, because it would sort of have a Nordic application of that. So I think it would be in concert with that.
Yes. One more on the, yes.
Yeah. I was thinking on this bullet point on using personal data in research. Since we all agree very much about those data are unique in the Nordic countries and they are crucial to do this type of research we are doing, I think we should make that point much stronger than it is today in this version. And I also would like that we not make it depend on the European legal framework what we say, because you never know what will be the final decision after these negotiations in Brussels in April and May. So I would like that we have something strongly that we want to have harmonization, or whatever we call it, to use this personal data because it's unique properties in medical and social science research.
Thank you. I think that we move on now to the issue on technical solutions. Any comments on that from the panel first? And the role of the NEIC in that context. That's unproblematic, it seems. Yeah.
Well, again, I just have. I want to say that it's important to build on existing infrastructures, also within the social sciences, and remember that even though, like Sverker Holmgren said yesterday, in the next strategy for e-infrastructures, they will make a definition what e-infrastructure is all about. And today you have these 2 silos, the e-infrastructure investments and support and funding schemes. And then you have the other infrastructure, like the social science data archive infrastructure. And what they're working on is, I mean, much the same. So you shouldn't close down to some part. You have to be open-minded and look into the good examples within the multifunctional infrastructures that are already there to support, among other, the Nordic initiative and priority on CESTA, which actually is established as a European infrastructure hosted by Norway, which actually is not even a member of the European community, which says something about the Nordic strength within this area of infrastructure. So that should be incorporated into this point, not to be forgotten.
Could I just mention that I'm not sure if the NSI in the Nordic countries are part of the Nordic e-infrastructure collaboration, but if they are not, I think our experience of making secure transfer of data could be of good knowledge for others. We do that. I mean, every day we transfer everything that we have to Eurostat, among others, and to OECD and others. So maybe something could be learned there. Thank you.
Final comment on the technical issues there, yes.
Just want to mention that within the data without boundaries and also besides that, we are planning some technical solution or pilot projects if we also calculate the Dutch and the Germans to Norwegian countries. I don't know. They want to be a part of it, but still we are in the process of trying some technical solutions between the remote access sites here. So it's actually on the way. So I think it could stand, but I'm not sure what is, like Neil said, the Nordic infrastructure collaboration. We're not a part of it, but I think we are the main goals for this test. So I don't know if it should stand there, or I don't have any opinion about it really.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, one final on the technical. Yeah. Gudmund.
So it's more of a reminder of what NAIC is than a comment. So it is a framework, a tool for facilitating collaboration on the infrastructures in the Nordics. So it's set up there to be used. So we are the tool that can be used by all these user communities to build collaboration on the infrastructures that are needed at the Nordic level.
Thank you very much. The next point is on research pilot project. So what's your opinion on that? That's a very concrete suggestion. Any objections? Go ahead. Fine. So very good. So then we move to the last one, which is the most cloudy in a way, in another way, the most undefined, but it's an ambition to create some sort of monitoring agency for this kind of facilities we are talking about. So is this a good idea? Is there a need? Panel.
I don't understand what it says.
As I said, it is not well defined, but the idea is to have some kind of facilitator and expert knowledge in this field. Right? Did the panel understand? Vigdis, yes.
I'll try. I think it's a good idea, and if you look at what's happening on the national levels throughout my field, the social science infrastructures in Europe, you can see that there is funding coming up to set up within the national social science infrastructure. UK, there are some initiatives in Denmark at the moment, and there's been discussion a little bit in Norway, but we're not there. This kind of coordinating bodies, you have in Germany, you have the Data Alliance or initiative for whole Germany, which have a role of policy formulating, monitoring that strategies are implemented. Not only that statistical offices release data according to law and not their own practice, but also that national strategies are implemented, not only formulated, moving from high policy level formulation to requirements, for instance, in where to deposit data in order to be able to share data. So I would say if in order to make something like this work, there need to be something on a national level as well. But I see this as something that could have a role, monitoring legal practice, not least, and legal development, as well as national data policies and national implementation of data policies and strategies. Yes.
Thank you. Anyone else in the panel who want to address this issue? Anyone else? Yes. Gunnel. No, yeah, that for two actually. Yes, Gunnel first.
I just want to come back a bit to this second thing that we didn't solve. I think it's very important when we discuss the field of health and welfare to see that it's both social science data and medical data, and that we might address different units of analysis. I think Mats made very clear that it is the patients, it's the individual that is in need of treatment. It might also be, in some fields, kind of regions. I'm thinking about this other report we have made at Nordforsk on distribution of health and welfare, which argues strongly for intervention, kind of at a meta level. And so the unit of analysis might be regions or individuals or national level. So I think we should think about this second formulation of the second part here, and maybe add to it something like what was suggested by Mats. Also, I'm not sure if I understand catalyzed processes. I think we could use a language which is a little bit easier to understand.
Thank you. Yes, Mats.
Okay, if that's the case, I would suggest that after of statistics, you add and National Health Registry Institutes. That way you have not excluded health, but you have both what's called welfare and health, and you can work on both issues. For data owners, they will, yeah. So I would suggest catalyzed processes for Nordic research support operations carried out by the Nordic Bureaus of Statistics and National Health Registry Institutes.
Did you get that?
I think, by the way, the general point is of data owners or something like that's better, because you didn't mention, for example, criminal statistics, which are not held in Sweden by either of those agencies, as far as I know. I just wanted to comment. I just wanted to comment on the rest of the document. I really like that the recommendations here are general about data that cover the medical and the social science data. And in the last paragraph, you have 3 social science data or infrastructures, as well as 4 that are biomedical. But in the rest of the prose, there is a lot of focus on, even in your terms, the patient rather than the individual. A lot of the things we study, we don't have a patient, we have an individual. And outcomes other than health are really important in terms of welfare, that is the second word. But almost all of the language here in terms of specific examples is about health care, disease, providers. And there aren't examples about schools and other kinds of care and social insurance and things that we need to know from the social and economic point of view about welfare. So I think it's just a little editing, but I think it is important not to have these social and economic issues completely subsumed under health.
Thank you. Now I think we have the very last comment from down the hall. Very last.
Timo A. Tanninen, Finnish Ministry of Social Affairs and Health. I will support the proposal of Denmark and formulation which Mats have given, because in Finland some agencies have right to work as a statistical national agency. For example, the Institute for Health and Welfare carry out this function in some data of health. Thank you.
Well, thank you all, panelists, audience, for a very interesting and thought-inducing discussion. We will have a very interesting now task of summarizing in a fair way the conclusions from this session. And we will meet each other in the afternoon and have a nice lunch till then. So thank you very much.